Have you ever felt a universe locked inside you, a silent symphony desperate for an audience? This is a story of Elara Vance, a woman who wove a world of vibrant color and sound in secret, while her own life was lived in shades of gray. In the heart of New York City stood the Celestial Grand Hotel, a monolith of glass and ambition, where the world's power brokers redrew maps and fortunes. Through its opulent halls, Elara moves like a phantom. At 28, she guided her cleaning cart with practiced, silent grace, her gaze perpetually fixed on the plush carpets, her shoulders curved inward as if to shrink from the world. She had mastered the art of being unseen, a defense built not of strength, but of a deep, gnawing fear of judgment. What the titans of industry and society mavens never suspected was that behind Elara's downcast eyes was a mind that journeyed thousands of miles away every single day. For 3 years from the confines of her tiny, book-filled apartment, she had been a voyager of languages. Her odyssey began in the quiet aftermath of losing her mother, Clara Vance, a woman whose life had been a collection of whispered, unfulfilled dreams. One day, Elara, Clara would say, her eyes distant, "I'll see it all." The Great Wall winding like a stone dragon, the romance of Parisian streets, the quiet poetry of a Kyoto garden. But a cruel illness had claimed Clara before her passport could gather a single stamp. The night after the funeral, enveloped in a suffocating stillness, Elara discovered her mother's old, dusty textbook on Mandarin. "I'll see it for you, Mom," she had vowed, a single tear splashing onto the yellow diagrams of characters. With travel an impossible luxury, she downloaded a language app and spoke her first hesitant words into the digital void. "Ni hao," was sure Elara. What began as a solemn tribute soon blossomed into a consuming passion. In the years that followed, she moved from simple greetings to the intricate dance of complex conversation, her teachers being YouTube tutorials and late-night forums with native speakers. She fell in love with Mandarin. Each character was a miniature masterpiece, a story in a single stroke. Each tone was a note in a melody she was learning to sing. But at the Celestial Grand, this vibrant, inner world remained her most guarded secret. To her colleagues, she was just quiet Elara, the one who would always take the holiday shifts no one else wanted. To Victoria Sterling, the hotel's impeccably dressed and glacially sharp events manager, she was less than a person, a functional piece of the hotel's machinery, useful when required, invisible otherwise. Elara. Victoria's voice would slice through the hushed service corridors. Penthouse needs a full turnaround, and the Croft Enterprises ballroom must be flawless for tomorrow. Their people are particular. Elara would simply nod, the silent acknowledgement her uniform. She never mentioned that she could debate the nuances of Song Dynasty ceramics or outline the finer points of business etiquette in flawless Mandarin. Who would possibly believe her? More importantly, who would care? Only Arthur Pendleton, the 67-year-old night security guard, with hands weathered by time and eyes that missed nothing, seemed to sense the depth behind her silence. "You know your problem, kid," he'd said one evening, catching her tracing Chinese characters into a fog window pane. "You're carrying a fortune in gold, but you walk around like you're made of dust. The world can't see what you refuse to show it." Elara had flushed, instantly hiding her hands. "It's just a hobby, Arthur." A flicker of frustration crossed his kind face. "The things you're best at, the things that make you you, might never be seen by anyone else. But don't you dare let them die in silence. That would be the real tragedy." Little did Elara know, his words were a prophecy. Within 24 hours, the carefully constructed walls of her invisibility would come crashing down, all because of a single phone call that no one at the Celestial Grand was equipped to answer. No one, except the quiet woman who cleaned the rooms of the powerful while dreaming in another tongue. The morning of the Croft Enterprises conference, the Celestial Grand hummed with an electric tension. 50 international executives were descending, and rumor had it that Julian Croft himself, the mercurial, brilliant young CEO who'd inherited and quadrupled a global empire, would be in attendance. "I expect nothing less than absolute perfection," Victoria announced at the morning staff briefing, her cold gaze sweeping the room before landing pointedly on Elara. "These are not people who tolerate mistakes. Stick to your duties. Do not deviate." Elara felt a familiar, dull ache of being singled out as the weakest link. As the meeting broke, she overheard Victoria speaking loudly to Simon, the front desk manager. Put Elara on the 14th floor today. That's where the majority of the Chinese delegation is staying. At least up there, her awkwardness won't be on display for the other guests. A hot flush of shame crept up Elara's neck, but she kept her head bowed, her silence her only shield. If only you knew, she thought, a familiar, bitter refrain. As she pushed her cart toward the service elevator, Arthur appeared at her side. Heard you got the 14th floor, he said, his tone deceptively casual. The universe has a funny way of putting us exactly where we need to be, doesn't it? Elara frowned. It's just Victoria being Victoria. Arthur chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Maybe something interesting is about to happen. The elevator chimed its arrival. As the door slid open, he gave her a meaningful look. Remember what I told you, kid. Don't die in silence. The 14th floor was an oasis of calm. With most of the guests at the opening sessions, Elara worked with quiet efficiency. In one suite, she found a financial magazine left open on a mahogany desk. A photo of Julian Croft stared back at her. His expression was severe, but his eyes held a startling depth and intelligence. The headline read, Croft's Next Frontier, Building Cultural Bridges to Asia. By late afternoon, Elara was tidy in the executive lounge. A hushed sanctuary she assumed was empty. Then, a man's voice, sharp with urgency, cut through the silence. No, that is not what I am saying at all. He was speaking into a phone, his voice tight with frustration. I understand there's a language barrier, but this partnership is too important to crumble over a simple miscommunication. Elara tried to tune it out, but the man's agitation was palpable. Hello? Are you still there? Can anyone translate? This is absurd. I need a Mandarin speaker right now. Through a crack in the door, she saw him, a tall man, pacing furiously, his suit jacket slung over a chair, sleeves rolled up his forearms. It was Julian Croft. I am about to lose the most important contract of the year because no one in this entire five-star hotel speaks the language, he muttered, raking a hand through his dark hair. Elara froze, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. A cold dread and a wild, unfamiliar impulse war within her. She could help, but the thought of approaching Julian Croft, of inviting that piercing gaze to fall on her, made her palms slick with sweat. What if she stumbled over her words? What if her accent wasn't perfect? What if he laughed at the sheer audacity of a housekeeper offering her services? Arthur's words echoed in her mind. Don't let them die in silence. For 3 years, she had carried her mother's dreams inside her like a fragile flame. For 3 years, she had hidden her gift away, convinced it would never be good enough. And now, just beyond that door, was a moment that felt as if it had been tailor-made for her hidden life. She stood paralyzed, caught between a lifetime of making herself small and a sudden, desperate urge to be brave. Just once, please. Julian's voice was now a raw plea. If there's anyone who can translate, this is urgent. The call with the Wei Corporation is about to disconnect, and we have spent months on this deal. Elara took a shuddering breath. Her hand, trembling, reached for the door handle. I can't, she whispered to herself. I just can't. She turned, ready to flee, to melt back into the hallways, as she had done 1,000 times before. But as she caught her own reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors, small, hunched, fading, she saw her mother's face, etched with a lifetime of dreams deferred. Before the fear could reclaim her, she pivoted. Her feet moved, seemingly their own accord, possessed by what was stronger than her terror. She pushed the door open. Excuse me, she said, her voice so faint it was lost in the air. She cleared her throat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Excuse me, Mr. Croft. She tried again, louder this time. I speak Chinese. I could help if you want. Julian Croft turned, his surprise absolute as he took in her simple housekeeper's uniform. For a long, terrifying moment, Elara was sure he would dismiss her, but desperation had eclipsed skepticism. You speak Mandarin? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Elara managed a tight nod. her mouth suddenly dry as dust. "Yes, I can translate for you." He hesitated for only a second more before thrusting the phone at her. It's on speaker. "The CEO of the Way Corporation is on the line from Shanghai. We're finalizing a massive manufacturing partnership, but critical detail has been lost in translation." Elara's hands shook as she took the phone, but the moment she heard the formal, rapid-fire Mandarin from the speaker, something inside her shifted. A lifetime of silent practice ignited. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the timid whisper of the hallway. It was strong, confident. The tones flowed with liquid grace as she introduced herself and calmly explained the situation. For the next 15 minutes, Elara became a conduit, a bridge between two worlds. She navigated complex business jargon, clarified cultural nuances, and eased the mounting tension. By the time the call concluded, with handshakes and agreements made across continents, a sense of shared laughter and relief filled the line. She handed the phone back to Julian, the adrenaline suddenly draining away, leaving her acutely aware of what she had just done. She had stepped out from the shadows. And now, Julian Croft was looking at her, really looking at her, with an unreadable expression of intense curiosity. "I'm sorry for interrupting," she stammered, backing away toward the door. "I should get back to my work." "Wait," Julian called out, but she was already gone, fleeing down a service staircase, her face burning with a mixture of pride and mortification. The following morning, Elara arrived at the hotel feeling as though she were walking through a dream. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the 15 minutes where she had been someone else entirely, someone capable, essential, and seen. She braced herself for the fallout. Surely she had overstepped. Surely Mr. Croft would have complained about the interruption. But the day began with an unnerving normalcy. At the morning briefing, Victoria assigned her duties with the usual air of dismissive authority. 14th floor again, Elara, and the Croft team has requested their conference room be prepared by noon. Ensure it is immaculate. A wave of relief washed over Elara. Perhaps he hadn't said anything. Perhaps, to a man like Julian Croft, it had been a minor, forgettable event. As she worked, she tried to convince herself that yesterday was an anomaly, but a small, defiant flame had been lit within her. While polishing a grand mirror in one of the suites, she paused and met her own gaze. For the first time in years, she didn't just see a housekeeper. She saw the woman who had saved a multi-million-dollar deal. She saw her mother's eyes staring back, filled with a question she was not yet ready to answer. At 11:45, she was giving the conference room its final touches when Victoria entered with two senior hotel managers. "Good. You're almost done," Victoria said, her eyes scanning for flaws. "The Croft Enterprises executive team will be arriving any second." Just then, the door swung open and Julian Croft walked in, flanked by two aides. The hotel managers snapped to attention, their faces plastered with professional smiles. "Mr. Croft," one began, "we trust your stay has been satisfactory." Julian offered polite, distracted nod, his eyes sweeping past them, searching the room until they landed on Elara, who was trying to merge with the wallpaper by the service entrance. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting to the pleasantries, "there is something I wanted to discuss." Elara's heart plummeted. This was it. The complaint. The reprimand. "I had a rather remarkable experience yesterday," Julian continued, his gaze fixed on her. "One of your employees single-handedly saved a critical business deal through an extraordinary display of linguistic and diplomatic skill." The managers exchanged baffled looks. "I'm sorry, Mr. Croft," the senior manager said. "I'm not aware of any staff providing such services. We have professionals on call for that." "You weren't aware," Julian replied, his tone cool, "because the person who assisted me was a member of your housekeeping staff." Every head in the room swiveled toward Elara. She felt the heat of their collective gaze, a spotlight she had spent her life avoiding. Victoria let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Mr. Croft, there must be a mistake. Our housekeeping staff doesn't." "Elara," Julian interrupted, addressing her directly and silencing Victoria. "That is your name, isn't it?" She nodded, her voice trapped in her throat. "Would you mind demonstrating for your management?" he asked. Perhaps translate something for me? The room fell utterly silent. This was her nightmare realized. To be put on display, to be tested and judged. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But something held her rooted to the spot. The memory of those 15 minutes when her voice had mattered. Yes, she managed to whisper. I can do that. Julian spoke several complex sentences about market expansion and the importance of cultural synergy. As Elara translated his words into fluid, elegant Mandarin, the expressions around her morphed from skepticism to shock to utter astonishment. When she finished, a slow smile spread across Julian's face. A perfect translation, he declared. Frankly, better than many of the professional services I've hired. The color had drained from Victoria's face. I had no idea, she stammered, shooting Elara a look that was a venomous cocktail of shock and resentment. Clearly, Julian replied icily. He turned back to Elara, his expression softening. How long have you been studying? 3 years, sir. Self-taught. Remarkable, Julian said, his admiration genuine. Why have you never pursued this professionally? The question hung in the air, the very question she had spent years burying. I never thought I was good enough, she admitted, the truth tasting like ash in her mouth. I don't have degrees or connections. It was just for me. Julian nodded, a decision solidifying his eyes. I have a proposition for you, Elara. My company is making a major push into the Chinese market. We don't just need translators. We need people who understand the nuances of communication. People with dedication and a natural aptitude. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I'd like to offer you a position, initially as a cultural liaison for our upcoming negotiations in Shanghai. If that goes well, we can discuss a permanent, senior role with Croft Enterprises. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. But I'm just a remarkably talented individual who's been grievously underestimated. Julian finished for her. Most of all, it seems, by herself. Victoria, her professional composure cracking, stepped forward. Mr. Croft, with all due respect, while Elara's hidden talent is impressive, there are protocols. She has no corporate experience, no formal training. Perhaps a professional, someone more suitable for your executive team. The unspoken word hung in the air, unsuitable. Someone who belonged behind a cleaning cart. Elara felt herself shrink, the familiar weight of her own inadequacy crashing down on her. Victoria was right. Who was she to think she could step into that world? But then Julian spoke, his voice like steel. Miss Sterling, is it? He said, turning his full attention to her. Let me ask you, yesterday, when my call from Shanghai was collapsing, where were your suitable professionals? Where was anyone willing to step forward? Elara was the only person who combined ability with the courage to act. That is exactly the kind of person I want on my team. He turned back to Elara. The decision is yours, of course. Time stood still. Before her lay two paths. The familiar, safe road of invisibility and a terrifying, brilliant, unknown future. She thought of her mother's unrealized dreams, of Arthur's words about not dying in silence, of the woman with her mother's eyes she had seen in the mirror that morning. I don't need time, Elara said, her voice clear and steady for the first time in her life. I would be honored to accept your offer. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind. Elara was immersed in a new world, juggling crash courses in international business, intensive Mandarin sessions with corporate tutors, and lessons in boardroom etiquette. Julian had assigned her to work directly with his chief of staff, Isabel, a sharp, impeccably organized woman who, to Elara's immense relief, was both patient and encouraging. You're absorbing this faster than most of our Ivy League interns, Isabel commented one afternoon. It's as if you've been preparing for this your whole life. In a way, Elara realized she had been, the day before their flight to Shanghai. Elara visited her mother's grave. I'm going to see the world for both of us now, Mom, she whispered, laying a bouquet of fresh peonies on the cool stone. Their departure from JFK was interrupted by a jarringly familiar voice. Victoria Sterling stood before them, offering a chilly, triumphant smile. Hotel management thought it best that an experienced liaison represent the Celestial Grand on this trip. Julian's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. But the arrangements were made. Elara felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach during the 14-hour flight. Cocooned in the hushed luxury of business class, old doubts began to surface. Was she just a novelty, a translator in a borrowed suit? When they landed, the dazzling, futuristic skyline of Shanghai both thrilled and overwhelmed her. The negotiations began the next morning. Elara, taking a deep breath, walked into a room of stone-faced executives. But when Mr. Wei, the CEO, saw her, his stern expression broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Ah," he said in Mandarin, the voice from the phone. "Mr. Croft told me your story. Most impressive." Elara responded fluently, and from that moment on, she was more than a translator. She became a vital cultural bridge, sensing and diffusing tensions before they arose, explaining nuances that no translation app could ever grasp. By the third day, it was clear her presence was indispensable. Even Victoria was forced to acknowledge it, her backhanded compliment dripping with resentment. "You're doing better than I expected, but let's see how long this fairy tale lasts." That night, at a dinner celebrating the successful conclusion of the deal, Julian raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes finding Elara's across the table, "and to seeing the extraordinary in plain sight." Later, she stood on a balcony overlooking the glittering expanse of Shanghai. The city lights a river of diamonds below, from housekeeper to a partner in a global negotiation. The transformation felt surreal. It wasn't just about what she had learned. It was about finally allowing herself to be seen. Victoria joined her, her usual armor of arrogance gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "I underestimated you." Elara offered a small, genuine smile. "So did I." Julian appeared beside them. "What's next for you, Elara?" She looked out at the endless horizon, her heart full. "I think I'd like to see more of the world," she said softly, "and not just through books." He smiled. "I think that can be arranged." A year later, Elara Vance stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Celestial Grand Hotel, the same room she had once cleaned on her hands and knees. Now, she was the keynote speaker, the director of Asian market development for Croft Enterprises, and every eye was on her. "Transformation," she began, her voice ringing with the confidence she had earned, "is not always about becoming someone new. Sometimes, it's about having the courage to finally become who you were meant to be all along." In the audience, Julian Croft watched with undisguised pride. Beside him sat Arthur Pendleton, now the head of security for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a quiet smile on his face. "When I first worked in this hotel," Elara continued, her gaze sweeping over executives, staff, and guests, "I believed my place was in the shadows. I buried my gifts because I was convinced they were worthless." Her eyes met Victoria's for a brief, neutral moment. "My turning point came from a conversation in a language I was never supposed to understand, a language I learned in memory of my mother." She held up a small, worn book of Chinese proverbs, a parting gift from Arthur. "A wise friend once told me, the things you're best at might never be seen, but don't you dare let them die in silence. We so often wait for permission to be worthy, for someone else to tell us we are enough. But worthiness is not granted, it is claimed." As thunderous applause filled the room, Elara stepped away from the podium and caught a reflection in a nearby mirror. The shrinking, invisible girl was gone. In her place stood a woman, luminous and whole. Later, at the reception, Arthur gave her a warm hug. "Not bad for a couple people who used to be invisible," he winked. A young woman in a housekeeping uniform approached her shyly. "Ms. Vance, I just want to say thank you. Your story meant a lot." Elara took her hand. "What's your name?" "Sophia." "Well, Sophia," Elara said, her voice soft but firm, "whatever dream you're carrying, don't you dare let it die in silence. It matters." As Sophia walked away, her shoulders a little straighter, Elara stepped onto the terrace, gazing out at the familiar, glittering skyline of the city that was finally her own. She pulled a worn photograph of her mother from her wallet. "We're seeing the world together, Mom." she whispered, "just like you always wanted." Her journey had not been about a change in fortune, but a change in self. It was about the quiet, revolutionary courage to speak up, to be seen, and in doing so, to finally see herself. Her first step had been a single, terrified sentence, but it had carried her across oceans, and she was just beginning.